In the first segment, you used the term woke, and you said that woke is what was sort of ruining everything. And I know that you're...
No, I didn't say ruining everything. I said that's why Trump could get reelected.
That's why Trump could get reelected.
Yeah.
That woke is a word used by the Black community to note that we must be aware of social injustices.
But words
and
migrate.
So why is that a bad thing?
It's not a bad thing, and originally that was absolutely a great thing. Alert to injustice, who's not for that? But words do migrate.
At all concerned about the fact that the International Criminal Court just today issued a subpoena for Bibi Netanyahu?
Well, that's ridiculous.
All right, listener name. Let's jump into today's deep dive. We're going to be looking at Bill Maher's appearance on The View, and boy, did that episode stir things up online.
Yeah, it seems like everybody's got an opinion. And we're diving headfirst into those opinions. Specifically, we're sifting through a mountain of YouTube comments to see what's got people so fired up.
And it's not just about Maher's jokes or his take on woke culture. There's a bigger conversation happening here about media bias, political correctness, and even the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
You know, it's interesting how this one episode became a Rorschach test for how people view The View itself.
In the first segment, you used the term woke, and you said that woke is what was sort of ruining everything. And I know that you're...
No, I didn't say ruining everything. I said that's why Trump could get reelected.
That's why Trump could get reelected.
It all starts with Whoopi Goldberg's statement that they present both sides of every story.
And the internet basically went, wait, what?
Right. A ton of the comments we're seeing are pure sarcasm. You know, pointing out that the show is known for being pretty left-leaning.
Yeah, it's like that opening statement just threw fuel on the fire, especially when you bring in someone like Bill Maher into the mix.
Because suddenly, in the world of The View, Bill Maher almost looks like a conservative figure.
You're right. And that makes his critiques of woke culture and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict land even harder.
And that's where you see comments like this one. I've never seen anyone destroy the liberal woke narrative so calmly and eloquently whilst leaving the View panel dumbfounded and speechless.
Strong words.
If I had any doubt that I was right about the change that's happened in the left, watching people protest for a terrorist organization like Hamas, that straightened me up pretty quick.
But it shows how some viewers saw Maher as this lone voice challenging the show's perceived orthodoxy.
And this idea of Maher as a destroyer of the woke narrative speaks volumes about where we are in our political discourse, doesn't it?
Totally. It shows how frustrated some people are with what they see as the dominance of woke ideology in the media.
And Sunny Hostin's reactions, well, they become this focal point for all that frustration.
Yeah, you see tons of comments focusing on her visible discomfort during Maher's critiques, even suggesting that she was triggered or seething.
It's like those reactions just confirm their suspicions about the show not being open to dissenting viewpoints.
And this is where we have to be careful, right? We're analyzing perceptions here, not saying that Hostin was actually triggered or that The View actively suppresses conservative voices.
Right. It's more about understanding how those perceptions reveal anxieties about things like cancel culture and the perceived silencing of certain viewpoints.
It struck me that in the first segment, you used the term woke, and you said that woke is what was sort of ruining everything. And I know that you're...
No, I didn't say ruining everything. I said that's why Trump could get reelected.
That's why Trump could get reelected.
Yeah.
So the term woke has been, in my view, co-opted by the right and weaponized and bastardized. And so I was surprised to hear you use the term because historically, as you know, because I think you're quite brilliant, that woke is a word used by the Black community to note that we must be aware of social injustices.
But words
and
migrate.
So why is that a bad thing?
It's almost as if the episode became this proxy battle for those anxieties.
It's like a pressure cooker, and all those simmering tensions about woke culture, media bias, and political correctness just boiled over in the comment section.
And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating, isn't it? This wasn't just about Bill Maher's jokes. It tapped into something much deeper about the state of our discourse and our anxieties about where we're headed as a society.
Exactly. And as we dig deeper into these comments, it'll be interesting to see how those anxieties manifest in different ways and how different viewers grapple with these complex issues.
One thread that runs through a lot of these comments is this idea that The View has become an echo chamber.
Not a bad thing, and originally that was absolutely a great thing. Alert to injustice, who's not for that? But words do migrate. Now, I'll use any term you want.
Okay.
Because maybe that is a word that's triggering, and so let's not use that word. I don't know, want to call it the super far left?
More about reinforcing a specific worldview than engaging in genuine debate.
Yeah, and you see that reflected in the comments about Meghan McCain and Elizabeth Hasselbeck, too.
The two conservative voices that used to be on the panel.
And their absence seems to fuel this perception that the show lacks balance.
Like some viewers are longing for the days when The View was a more heated battleground of ideas.
That's a really interesting point because it speaks to this broader yearning for a more robust exchange of ideas in our society overall.
Like people are craving spaces where they can hear different viewpoints and engage in meaningful conversations, even if they disagree.
And those spaces seem to be shrinking, which just makes episodes like this one with Bill Maher all the more explosive.
It's like we're starved for a good debate, and when one finally erupts, we can't look away.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it's in those moments of eruption that we get a glimpse into the raw emotions, the deeply held beliefs, and the underlying tensions that shape our political landscape.
So as we move forward with this deep dive, let's keep an eye on those moments of eruption.
Let's see where the sparks fly and what they illuminate about the state of our discourse.
But don't tell me that the left hasn't changed. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when it was the conservatives who hated the Jews.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a joke. But,
Too dark, too
but-
dark.
well, maybe it is, but it's true. I mean, you know, if I had any doubt that I was right about the change that's happened in the left, watching people protest for a terrorist organization like Hamas,
Because it's
that
in those
straightened me up
flashes of
pretty
heat
quick.
and light that we often find the most revealing truths about ourselves and the world around us.
Now, you mentioned that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict also became a flashpoint in this episode. Let's dig into that a bit deeper. What were some of the comments that stood out to you?
Well, when Maher said, "Stop attacking Israel," it was like he threw a match into a tinderbox.
Oh, I bet.
Some praised him for addressing an issue they felt was ignored on The View, but others were quick to defend Palestine.
Arguing that the situation is far more nuanced than Maher's statement suggested.
And that's what's fascinating about this deep dive. The comments reveal how intertwined these issues are. Woke culture, media bias, international conflicts, they all feed into this broader anxiety about where we're headed as a society.
And the comment section becomes a microcosm of that struggle for narrative control. It's where people grapple with these complex issues and try to make sense of the world around them.
And that's what we're trying to do here too, right? To understand the different perspectives and see how this one episode of The View became a lightning rod for so many of our anxieties and frustrations.
Absolutely. Because by understanding those anxieties and frustrations, we can start to have more productive conversations about how to move forward as a society.
And that's what we're all about here on The Deep Dive, diving deep into the conversations that matter and hopefully surfacing with some insights that can help us navigate this complex and ever-changing world.
All right, let's take a closer look at some of those specific moments in the episode that really got people talking, those moments where the tension was palpable and the comment section exploded.
I'm thinking of that exchange about Biden's accomplishments, where Maher says something like, "He fixed the economy," and you could practically feel Sunny Hostin's skepticism radiating through the screen.
Oh, I remember that. It was like a whole conversation happening in just a few glances.
And the comments went wild. Some saw it as Sunny being triggered again, while others saw it as a subtle critique of the Biden administration, like a silent, "we're not buying it" message.
It's amazing how much nonverbal communication can say, right? Especially on a visual medium like television.
Totally. And those small moments, a glance, a pause, they can speak volumes and spark a ton of interpretation and debate.
Absolutely, because they offer this glimpse behind the curtain, a peek into the raw, unfiltered reactions that we don't often get to see on TV.
And that's what we crave, isn't it? That sense of authenticity, that glimpse of what's really going on beneath the surface.
And that's what makes analyzing these comments so fascinating. It's like we're all collectively decoding these moments, trying to make sense of the subtle cues and hidden messages.
So as we continue our deep dive, let's keep our decoder rings handy and pay close attention to those small but powerful moments.
Let's see what we can decipher and what those insights reveal about the deeper currents shaping our political and cultural landscape.
Sounds good to me.
Well, I mean, it's just astounding to me that they can't tell the good guys from the bad guys. I mean, just morally. I mean, let me tell you, if you're for Hamas, just live in Gaza for a day. And I'm not talking about while the war is on. I mean, before the war. Trust me, you would go running and screaming and begging to live in Tel Aviv, a place that has your values. I mean, women have no, I mean, this is a show watched by a lot of women. Women have no rights
Right.
in this place. And a lot of majority Muslim countries around the world. I mean, there is no equal rights as far as speech, dress, opportunities for education, reproductive rights, freedom from sexual violence, freedom from sexual harassment.
The LGBTQ community as well.
Yes.
That too. But you throw around the term apartheid. There is a gender apartheid in a lot of the world where women are second-class citizens at best.
Now, speaking of decoding, I'm really curious to hear more about what people had to say about the hosts themselves. What were the main criticisms and praises directed at Whoopi, Sunny, and the rest of the panel?
Well, one theme that pops up a lot is this perception of hypocrisy, especially towards Whoopi.
Her opening statement about presenting both sides really rubbed some people the wrong way.
Yeah, a lot of viewers pointed to past episodes where they felt the show had shut down conservative viewpoints.
Like they were saying, come on, Whoopi, your actions speak louder than words.
Exactly. And this perception of bias was only amplified by the comments about Sunny Hostin.
Many felt her reactions to Maher were too emotional, too dismissive, and further proof that the show doesn't tolerate dissent.
It's fascinating how Sunny, in particular, becomes this symbol for the anxieties about woke culture and silencing opposing voices.
It's like she represents, for some viewers, everything they find frustrating about the current political climate.
Which is why it's so important to approach these comments with nuance and critical thinking. We're not here to endorse or condemn anyone, but to understand the underlying dynamics at play.
Right, to understand the cultural anxieties being expressed and how this episode of The View became a focal point for those tensions.
Exactly. And as we continue our deep dive, let's keep that in mind. Let's approach these comments with curiosity and a willingness to see things from multiple perspectives.
Because that's where the real learning happens, right? When we step outside our own echo chambers and engage with the full spectrum of opinions and emotions that this episode has stirred up.
Absolutely, because it's in that space of open-mindedness and empathy that we can start to bridge the divides and find some common ground.
And who knows, maybe even have some fun along the way.
Yeah.
After all, this is The View we're talking about.
All right. And this deep dive wouldn't be nearly as interesting if it wasn't for the drama, the passion, and the occasional dose of humor that comes with the territory.
So let's buckle up and see what other treasures we can unearth as we delve deeper into the heart of this online maelstrom.
I'm ready to dive in. Let's see what else we can learn about ourselves and our world through the lens of this one fascinating episode of The View.
At all concerned about the innocent civilians that have been collectively punished and murdered, largely children and women?
Of
and
course.
are you at all concerned about the fact that the International Criminal Court just today issued a subpoena for Bibi Netanyahu?
Well, that's ridiculous, but it's a war.
Why?
It's a war. Because it's a war, and they were attacked, and they're defending themselves. Now, this is a war. Do you think Hamas needs to be destroyed?
You know, what's wild is how this whole thing has become about so much more than just Bill Maher and The View.
It's like a window into all these anxieties people have about where our culture is going, you know? All those worries about political correctness and feeling like you can't speak your mind anymore.
Exactly. And the comment section turns into this battleground where those anxieties play out in real time.
There was this one comment that really stuck with me. It was from someone who said they'd been a Democrat their whole life, even voted against Trump twice, but now they're actually thinking about voting for him next time.
Wow, that's a pretty big shift.
I know, right?
Oh.
And they specifically said it was Maher's critiques of woke culture that made them rethink things. It's like they're saying, I can't support a party that doesn't represent my values anymore.
It's interesting because that wasn't the only comment like that. Several others echoed that sentiment, talking about feeling disillusioned with the Democrats and like the party's move too far to the left.
Like they're looking for a new political home, somewhere that takes their concerns about woke culture seriously.
And that's where figures like Bill Maher come in. They offer this different perspective, a voice of dissent that challenges the mainstream narrative.
And for some people, that voice is really appealing, even if it's coming from someone they wouldn't normally agree with.
It speaks to this desire for authenticity, for someone who's not afraid to say what they think, even if it ruffles some feathers.
Shifting gears a bit, I'm curious to hear more about what people had to say about The View itself. You know, we talked about its perceived political leanings and how things have changed since Meghan McCain and Elizabeth Hasselbeck left.
Right. There's this feeling that the show's lost some of its bite, that it's become less about genuine dialogue and more about preaching to the choir.
It's like viewers are saying, we want to see a real debate, not just a bunch of people agreeing with each other.
And that desire for a more robust exchange of ideas comes up again and again in the comments. It's like they're craving a space where different perspectives are not just tolerated, but actively engaged with.
And that's where the criticism of the hosts comes in, especially Sunny Hostin and Joy Behar. Some viewers felt they were too quick to dismiss Maher's viewpoints, creating this atmosphere of hostility rather than open-mindedness.
Like they're not really listening, just waiting for their chance to jump in and score points.
Exactly. It's like they've already made up their minds and they're not interested in having their views challenged.
And that can be really frustrating for viewers who are looking for a genuine exchange of ideas.
There was this one comment that said, "It's like they're talking at us, not with us."
Ooh, that's a good one. It really captures that feeling of disconnection, of not being heard or taken seriously.
Yeah, when you lose that sense of connection, it's easy to feel alienated and distrustful.
Absolutely. It's like we're all craving these spaces where we can have meaningful conversations, even when we disagree. But those spaces are getting harder and harder to find.
So how do we create those spaces? How do we foster a more productive and respectful dialogue, both on shows like The View and just in our everyday lives?
That's the big question, isn't it? I think it starts with a willingness to listen to understand, not just to respond, to really try to see things from the other person's perspective, even if we don't agree with them.
And to remember that everyone brings their own experiences and values to the table.
Exactly. Those differences are not something to be afraid of, but something to learn from.
Because it's often in those differences that we find the most valuable insights and connections.
Okay, let's bring it back to the episode itself. I'm curious to hear more about the viewers' reactions to the specific topics that came up. We've touched on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but what were some of the other hot-button issues that sparked debate?
Well, Maher's statement about Biden fixing the economy definitely set some people off.
This is the question.
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
So how
Okay,
can we do
well,
that with a ceasefire?
All right, so Hamas needs to be destroyed because they are a terrorist organization who say openly that they want to commit genocide on the Jewish people, on the state of Israel. That's what from the river to the sea means, okay? And they say it very openly. They said, we did this attack. They've attacked Israel 5 times. They've started 5 wars since they were given that land back. They could have chosen to turn that place into any place they wanted to, and they took a lot of money that they took from the international community, and they spent it on bombs and guns and building tunnels. So if they need to be destroyed, how do we do that? It's a war. I don't know how to do that, and you don't know how to do that.
But are you
I assume the
concerned about
Israeli.
innocent lives?
Of course, everybody is, but that's what happens in a war. Here's a way to stop that. Stop attacking Israel.
Oh, I bet. That's such a sensitive issue, and people's experiences are so varied.
Exactly. Some viewers were praising Biden's accomplishments, pointing to economic indicators and such.
While others were saying those indicators don't reflect the reality for everyday Americans.
It's like they were looking at the same data, but interpreting it in completely different ways, based on their own lived experiences and political beliefs.
And that's where the danger of echo chambers comes in. When you only surround yourself with people who think like you, it's easy to dismiss information that challenges your perspective.
It's like we're living in parallel universes, each with its own version of reality.
And that makes it so hard to have productive conversations, to find common ground, and to move forward as a society.
So how do we break out of these echo chambers? How do we expose ourselves to different perspectives and engage in more meaningful dialogue?
That's a tough one. I think it starts with being intentional about seeking out diverse sources of information, reading articles, watching news programs that challenge your assumptions.
And being willing to have conversations with people who hold different views, even if it feels uncomfortable.
Exactly. Because it's often in those uncomfortable conversations that we learn the most.
Now, I want to hear more about the reactions to Maher's comments on wokeness. We've touched on it, but let's dig a little deeper into the criticisms and defenses of his perspective.
When Whoopi asked if the media skews the news to push a narrative, Maher's answer was nothing short of masterful. Listen to this.
It's just nothing.
Yeah.
And it's narrative over truth. I mean, it's not like when I hear people talk on either side of it, I always think they're lying. They're just telling me half of it.
Yeah.
And I never trust them anywhere until I check out the other half.
One of the biggest criticisms was that Maher was being dismissive of the concerns that fuel woke culture. Many felt he was oversimplifying a complex issue and not really engaging with the nuances of social justice movements.
Like they were saying, hey, you can't just lump everyone who cares about social justice into this one big woke basket.
Right. There's a lot of diversity within those movements, and it's important to acknowledge that complexity.
On the other hand, some people defended Maher's perspective, arguing that he was just pointing out the excesses of woke culture, how it can sometimes become dogmatic and intolerant.
They appreciated his willingness to challenge what they saw as a sacred cow, to speak out against this perceived culture of censorship and silencing.
It's interesting how this whole debate about wokeness so often turns into this us versus them mentality.
Right. That kind of binary thinking is so unproductive. It prevents us from having nuanced conversations and finding common ground.
It's like we're trapped in this world of oversimplification, where complex issues get reduced to sound bites and hashtags.
And that's a dangerous place to be, because when we lose the ability to engage with nuance and complexity, we lose the ability to understand each other and solve the challenges we face as a society.
So how do we break free from that trap? How do we move beyond these simplistic binaries and have more thoughtful and productive conversations?
I think it starts with being willing to embrace ambiguity, to acknowledge that there are often multiple truths and multiple perspectives on any given issue.
And to be open to the possibility that we might be wrong, that our perspective might be limited, and that there's always more to learn.
Absolutely. It's in that space of humility and open-mindedness that we can really grow and evolve.
Now, I'm curious about the viewers' reactions to the actual jokes Maher made.
Old school liberals, which I would mostly count myself as, old school conservatives, there's still some of those
You've
left.
changed, though.
Wait, what are the other two?
Go ahead.
Well,
What are the other two?
well, that's what that's what I was trying to find out in this book. I don't think
Yeah.
I have. And you know, we were saying in the break we have to come up with a new word for woke. Let's have a contest because this is a word that's triggering. But I mean, those concepts that are different than they were 5 years ago. Homeless was a term that I thought we kind of came up with because people were calling them bums and
Yes.
vagrants and hobos.
Yeah, now that's
homeless.
the word.
Now,
It's
no.
It's unhoused.
Well, it's
now.
people
Unhoused.
experiencing
Now it's unhoused.
homelessness. But they're experiencing it on the street.
Yeah.
Okay, the liberal view of that was for compassion's sake. We're the liberals, we're compassionate. Let's get these people off the street.
Yeah.
That's not the view of the, whatever word we're going to come up with for this. Their view of the homeless is they're an endangered species that needs to be protected in their natural habitat. Living their best life under a bridge. I mean, Biden just presents as old. It's not really fair.
No.
Because he's almost the same age. Trump is almost the same age as
Yeah,
him.
I know.
But Trump doesn't present that way. You know, you look at somebody right away, you can kind of just sum them up. I mean, we are not young, but we don't present as old.
Yeah.
Biden does. I saw him yesterday making that speech.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, he's cadaver-like.
We know humor can be this powerful tool for easing tension and connecting with people, but it can also be a weapon that hurts and divides.
One joke that got a lot of attention was Maher's quip about the Democratic Party being so woke they're sleepwalking. Some people thought it was hilarious, you know, they loved the wit and the satirical edge.
Like they were saying, we need to snap out of this woke dream and get back to reality.
Exactly. They appreciated Maher's ability to cut through the noise and express their frustrations in a funny and memorable way.
But I'm guessing not everyone was laughing.
You're right. Some found it dismissive and insensitive. They felt like Maher was using humor to trivialize the concerns of people fighting for social justice and equality, like he was belittling their efforts.
It shows how humor can be a double-edged sword, right? It can bring people together or drive them apart, depending on the context and the audience.
For sure. And it highlights how important it is to be mindful of the impact of our jokes, even when we're just trying to make people laugh.
Well said. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I wanted to touch on one more aspect of humor that came up in the comments. Laughter as a form of resistance. Several people talked about how laughter can be used to challenge authority, to push back against dominant narratives, and even to cope with difficult or painful experiences.
That's a really interesting point. It speaks to the power of humor to give people a sense of agency and empowerment, even in the face of adversity. It's like saying, you can't control me or my experience. I'm going to find joy and resilience, even in the darkest of times.
It's almost like an act of defiance, a way of reclaiming your humanity and refusing to be silenced or defeated.
Exactly. And we see this throughout history, you know? Oppressed groups using humor to cope with injustice, individuals finding moments of levity in the midst of tragedy.
It reminds us that humor isn't just about entertainment or escape. It's about resilience, resistance, and the enduring human spirit.
Beautifully said. It's what makes humor such a powerful and enduring force in our lives.
Okay, listener name. We've covered a lot in this part of our deep dive. We've explored reactions to Maher's comments on wokeness, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the economy, and even the role of humor in our political discourse. But there's still more to unpack. Join us for part 3, where we'll examine the viewer's thoughts on media bias, the influence of social media, and the search for meaning and connection in a world that often feels fragmented and chaotic. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the internet's reaction to Bill Maher on The View, it really strikes me how much this episode exposed about the whole media landscape and how people are feeling about it.
It's like Maher's appearance just ripped off the Band-Aid on all these simmering tensions, This deep distrust of the mainstream narrative and people wanting more authenticity, more nuance in the conversations we're having.
And the comment section becomes this fascinating arena where those anxieties play out, with viewers from all sides questioning everything they're seeing and hearing.
There's one comment that really stuck with me. It said, "It's not about left versus right anymore. It's about who's willing to question the narrative no matter where it's coming from, and who just blindly accepts what they're told."
Powerful stuff. It's like they're saying, we're not falling for it anymore. We're going to think for ourselves and find the truth, even if it makes us uncomfortable.
And that independent thinking is so important these days, Especially with all the information overload we face constantly.
Especially with social media being such a huge force in shaping how we see the world and how we talk about politics.
Social media is a real double-edged sword, isn't it? On one hand, it can connect us with different perspectives and give a voice to people who might not have been heard before.
But on the other hand, it can create echo chambers, spread misinformation, and amplify those extreme voices that just want to divide us.
Yeah, and a lot of the comments we saw express this fear of being trapped in those echo chambers, surrounded by people who just agree with everything you say.
It's like living in parallel universes, right? Where everyone has their own set of facts and their own version of reality.
And that makes it almost impossible to have real conversations, to bridge those divides, and to find any sort of common ground.
So how do we escape these echo chambers? How do we become more critical of the information we consume online and avoid falling into those traps?
I think it starts with being honest with ourselves about our own biases, and then actively seeking out viewpoints that challenge those biases.
It's about stepping outside our comfort zones and engaging with people who see things differently, really listening to what they have to say with an open mind.
And remembering that even the most divisive issues are rarely black and white. There's always nuance, complexity, and there's always more to learn.
Speaking of complexity, it was really interesting to see how this episode of The View brought together all these seemingly unrelated topics like woke, culture, media bias, and even the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
It's like they're all interconnected, woven together by this underlying anxiety about where our society is headed and who gets to control the narrative.
And the comment section becomes this battleground where those narratives are challenged, debated, and ultimately reshaped.
What I find encouraging, though, is that even amidst all the disagreements and division, there were also moments of empathy, understanding, and a genuine desire for connection.
Yeah, you saw people expressing this longing to bridge the divides, to find common ground, and to have those tough conversations with more respect and understanding.
It's like they're saying, we may not agree on everything, but we can still listen to each other, learn from each other, and work together to build a better world.
And that's a message we need to hear more often these days.
Absolutely. In a world that feels so fragmented and polarized, it's crucial to remember that we're all interconnected and that our shared humanity is stronger than any difference that might divide us.
So as we wrap up this deep dive listener name, I hope you're walking away with a sense of both the challenges and the possibilities that lie ahead.
We live in a complex world that's changing rapidly, and there are no easy answers. But by engaging in thoughtful dialogue, questioning our assumptions, and seeking out diverse perspectives, we can face those challenges together and create a more just, equitable, and harmonious society.
Thanks for joining us on this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep connecting.